Prince Charles, now King Charles III, was always destined to wear the crown. From a royal childhood in Buckingham Palace to his naval career and life as the Prince of Wales. It's been both smooth sailing and a few rough seas along the way. Say what you will about the new British king, but one cannot argue that Charles has faced every obstacle in his life with grace and fortitude.
Charles is very much a dominant figure today in the monarchy, in the institution.
He was waiting to become king.
But at the same time, he recognises the gravitas of his position.
From a fairy tale marriage that went awry, to finally walking down the aisle with his first love. He's fought most of his battles on the front pages of international news outlets. From a young prince to now the king, he's been a constant in the British royal family, hoping one day to not only wear the crown, but usher the British royals into a new modern era as King Charles III. On September 8th, 2022, the world lost a beloved queen, and a new monarch began his legacy.
Few leaders receive the outpouring of love that we have seen. People of loving service are rare in any walk of life. Leaders of loving service are still rarer. But in all cases, those who serve will be loved and remembered.
In the wake of Queen Elizabeth's passing, the world paused to mourn a great lady, and all eyes turned to the royal family as they grieved and entered this new phase of their lives.
The transition will be difficult in that we have a population in the United Kingdom that have known nobody else but Queen Elizabeth II. And to suddenly have King Charles III, it'll feel very strange.
But one man in particular stood out in the spotlight on the world stage. The gentle, introspective first son of Elizabeth, the now King Charles III.
I think in many ways Charles has lived most of his life in the shadows. He's lived most of his life in the shadow of his mother and being there as Prince of Wales, the longest serving Prince of Wales in history. A job that has required a great deal of patience because he spent over 60 years waiting for, the top job.
Nobody wants to be overshadowed, particularly when they're doing such good work and particularly when they've spent their whole life knowing that they are the eventual sovereign. But at the same time, I think he was quite proud of the position and he was proud of the people in his life.
As he now prepares for his coronation, Charles has many new ideas about the monarchy and the future of their role in the world and the United Kingdom. But what lies beneath the crown? All great stories have a beginning, and Charles has 74 years of successes, heartbreaks, loves, and noble pursuits that have made him into the king he is today.
He's been preparing all his life, certainly since he left the Navy in the mid-1970s, and he's done incredibly well. He'll be the best prepared monarch that we've had ever in the United Kingdom.
King Charles III was born on November 14th, 1948 at Buckingham Palace, the first child of then Princess Elizabeth, Duchess of Edinburgh, and Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. As a future lover of the arts, it is only fitting that at a month old, he was christened in the music room at Buckingham Palace, under the eyes of his grandfather, King George VI, and his grandmother, then Queen Elizabeth I, with whom he would have the closest relationship to of any present. Charles had 3 siblings, Anne, Andrew, and Edward, but it was Anne with which he developed the strongest bond.
It was quite interesting that the Queen had Charles and Anne quite young, and then there was a gap of, give or take, 10 years before Andrew and Edward came along. And so really, Charles and Anne sort of really leaned on each other in many respects.
The two were not only close in age, but they grew up as a devoted sibling duo, often relying on each other for company and comfort when their parents were away on royal tours. The brash and confident opposite to Charles's gentle and sensitive nature, the two enjoyed horseback riding and music, and Anne was often Charles's defender and advocate. This relationship persisted well into their adult years, with Anne remaining Charles's steadfast confidant and continuing to encourage Charles to break out of his shell.
He was incredibly close to his sister, Princess Anne, but essentially they were raised by nannies, by governesses, and I think quite protected from the outside world. You know, the Queen sort of didn't really consider the nursery her domain, and she was largely absent as a mother because of her job, being Queen.
Charles had an artistic soul, inquisitive mind, and introverted disposition that materialized in the form of many hobbies, including painting, countryside sports like fishing and hiking, reading and playing the cello. His love of art and nature was encouraged by his grandmother, whom he spent much of his time with, and had a large hand in raising him and his sister. A shy, introspective thinker from a young age, Winston Churchill once remarked that he is young to think so much. Though Charles was surrounded by nannies and governesses, his childhood was ultimately a lonely one. Elizabeth was seemingly disinterested in having a role in raising her children, and Philip was a stern man who reprimanded Charles fiercely.
Little Charles, you know, so excited to see his mother and waiting for her, and then when she gets to him in line, he gets a handshake rather than a hug. And I think that sort of says everything that we need to know about Charles's upbringing. Well, actually, Charles was quite a sensitive boy. He loved the stage. He was quite shy in many ways, not at all like Philip.
His grandmother would often write to Charles's parents on his behalf, pleading with them to spend more time with their devoted son, but to no avail. In the midst of this, a shy Charles, grappling with his place in the family, was thrust into the spotlight upon the death of his grandfather, King George V. Charles was automatically named heir apparent at only 3 years of age, a title he would hold for the next 70 years, and as a change begets change, on June 2, 1953, Charles attended his mother's coronation at Westminster Abbey as she became Queen Elizabeth II.
And here, in the most mysterious of the rites of coronation, the Archbishop anoints her with holy oil and consecrates her to her great office.
The popularity of the royal family is without question down to her from her coronation in 1952, and the longest reigning monarch ever.
He was the first child to witness the coronation and stood at the place of honour beside his mother. An exciting time for his family was overshadowed as the now Queen Elizabeth grew increasingly distant, preoccupied with fulfilling her duties to the crown.
Here was a young queen who was entirely dedicated to duty, as she was for her entire life, but that did mean leaving her 2 young children behind.
It's quite easy to criticise the Queen and Prince Philip for not being present in their children's lives, but we have to understand that when Prince Charles was a little boy, they had a huge constitutional role that they were obligated to. Her father's untimely death meant that she was really thrust into a role into what was a largely male-dominated era.
When Charles began attending school, things unfortunately continued to be difficult for the young royal.
I think now, if a parent were to sort of have a child that's very sensitive, there are so many outlets, there's so much guidance in terms of how to bring out the best in a child. But in those days, you just got packed off to school and told to get on with it. And I think that's what made things quite difficult between Charles and Philip for a number of years.
In 1956, when Charles commenced classes at Hill House School in West London, he was the first heir apparent to attend school, rather than be educated by a private tutor. He was treated as any other boy would be by the school's founder and headmaster, Stuart Townsend, who advised the Queen to have Charles then attend 2 of his father's former schools, Cheam Preparatory School in Hampshire in 1958, followed by Gordonstone in the northeast of Scotland in 1962. Charles was bullied for being quiet and harassed for his large ears, and Gordonstone, being particularly rigorous, was a bad fit for the quiet and clement royal.
He often felt very misunderstood, none more so than when he was at Gordonstone, a school that he really wasn't suited to. It was a school his father went to. It was brilliant for Philip, but for the shy, sensitive and rather introvert Charles, it was just a miserable, miserable time.
Though Charles states that he was ultimately grateful for his education, he remarked that, "I didn't enjoy school as much as I might have, but that was only because I'm happier at home than anywhere else."
It really informed the man the king is today. He's a deeply empathetic human being. He cares enormously about young people in particular, and he's devoted his adult working life to the betterment of young people, to making sure young people have the opportunities they need.
Not one to follow traditions, Charles followed his love of learning to Trinity College, instead of joining the British Armed Forces, where he studied archaeology and anthropology, followed by history, later attending the University College of Wales, where he learned the Welsh language, and finally graduating from the University of Cambridge with a Bachelor of Arts. He was the first heir apparent to earn a bachelor's degree. Though Charles was made Prince of Wales by patent letter in 1958, it wasn't until more than a decade later in 1969 that he was formally crowned by his mother at a televised ceremony held at Carnarvon Castle. In the preceding years, there has been a swell of Welsh unrest under British rule, and a growing desire to establish Wales as its own nation. Coupled with the release of the controversial documentary Royal Family, in which the behind-the-scenes preparations for the investiture was shown for the world to see, Charles was under considerable pressure to make a good impression.
I, Charles, Prince of Wales, do become your liege man of life and limb, and of earthly worship, and faith and truth I will bear unto thee, to live and die against all manner of folks.
But Charles had taken his role as Prince of Wales, something many before him had considered ceremonial, very seriously for a number of years.
What he was adamant on doing as Prince of Wales was carving a role for himself and creating a role for that royal in waiting, because essentially that was what he was doing. He was waiting to become king.
His formal education in the Welsh language, history and culture, and his many tours of the Welsh countryside led him to give the first two paragraphs of his investiture speech in their native tongue, which boosted Welsh nationalism, according to then Prime Minister Harold Wilson.
Mae'ch anerchiad wedi fy nghyffwrdd yn ddwys, a gallaf eich sicrhau fy mod wedi cymryd sylwi o'r gobeithion am lygwyd anddyn nhw.
This was Charles's most prominent public appearance to date and was seen worldwide by 500 million people.
The oohing and aahing isn't just because they're famous, it's because they have a kind of fame that reaches back 1,000 years, that doesn't happen here and nobody can get without doing what they're doing.
Recently, Charles has commented on the importance of listening to and respecting all his citizens, stating that something as curious as the monarchy won't survive unless you take account of people's attitudes. After all, if people don't want it, they won't have it.
So you had this contact, you had this personal touch that prior to that was missing. And what you see now is that personal touch. He gets involved with it.
I think responsibility is the most important thing, is the actual trust that's put in you to deal with other people and the feeling that they can perhaps put their trust in you as well. I think that is the basis of one's job, to serve other people. I think if you have a sense of duty, and I like to think I have, then service is something that you give yourself to people, particularly if they want you, and sometimes if they don't want you, if you feel that you can do something, even if they think that, you're not doing something very useful, and you think you're right there, then you can be of service.
Charles's fierce dedication to representing and defending the people soon led him to a career in the military, and in 1971, a little over a year after Charles became Prince of Wales, he followed in the footsteps of his father, grandfather, and great-grandfathers by joining the Navy. A desire to fly had been an early wish for Charles, and while at Cambridge he followed that ambition by requesting flying lessons. He was such an adept student that he even flew himself to his own jet piloting lectures at the Royal Air Force Cranwell in Lincolnshire. After training, he enrolled in the Britannia Royal Naval College, and thus began a successful 5-year career in the skies and on the seas. Not merely following the path of his forefathers, Charles attributes his desire to serve to his great-uncle Lord Mountbatten, who he saw as an honorary grandfather and confidant.
Charles was incredibly close to Lord Mountbatten, and I think probably did, for some of his life, consider him to be perhaps more a father figure than his own father. Certainly, he spent more time with Mountbatten. I think Mountbatten understood Charles in a way that Philip didn't, and he was able to sort of draw out the more fun side to Charles.
He referred to him as his honorary grandfather. They really shared a lovely relationship. And I think, Lord Mountbatten, he had a very close relationship to the British royal family, and as a result, he understood the dynamics. And I think he did share quite a few interests with the young Prince Charles, so he really served as something of a mentor.
In 1976, towards the end of Charles's naval career, he was given command of the HMS Bronnington, and later that year he used his severance pay to establish the Prince's Trust, a charitable organisation dedicated to funding community initiatives that support disadvantaged youth.
Ever since he left the Navy and used that severance to set up the Prince's Trust, was determined that he was going to use his title and his spotlight to do something important, to do something meaningful, which was really just as well. His great success as Prince of Wales was creating an identity of his own.
Though his official service had ended, Charles is a staunch believer that learning and practicing is a lifelong pursuit, leading him to complete parachute training and pilot from time to time, even flying the monarchy's official aircraft. More recently, in 1995, Charles was promoted to Group Captain for the Royal Air Force and granted honorary 5-star ranks in all 3 of the armed forces, becoming a Field Marshal, Admiral of the Fleet, and Marshal of the Royal Air Force in 2012. But schooling and serving weren't the only thing on Charles's mind, as he had a number of romantic entanglements throughout his youth. He even dated Sarah Spencer, his future first wife Diana's older sister. While still training for his naval career, Charles met his current wife Camilla Strand through mutual friends.
She was pretty, she had a great sense of humour, and she shared a very similar sense of humour with Prince Charles.
The two quickly became close friends and then romantic partners, and it was said that Charles liked that she was so natural and easy and friendly, not in any way overawed by him, not fawning or sycophantic, so he pursued her tirelessly. They were often spotted at polo matches, of which Charles was extremely fond, and were known as a well-suited pair in their social circles.
If you speak to anyone who knows Charles and Camilla, they will say that Charles is a better man for having Camilla in his life. I think you only need to look at him when he's with Camilla to see just how happy he is. Absolutely, she's been wonderful for him.
As they grew more serious, Charles vacationed with her family, and she had begun to pierce the veil of his secret royal life by meeting several of his family members. But their blossoming love affair was cut short before it could truly begin, as Charles was deployed to his formal naval career. There are speculations that the deployment was due to the royal family not approving of Camilla, thus orchestrating to separate the two, that the two met too young, and still others say that the relationship ended because Charles didn't ask Camilla to wait for him, and Camilla married Andrew Parker Bowles, a man she had been on again, off again with since the late 1960s.
Charles was devastated. He sent mournful letters to his friends. He confided in Lord Louis Mountbatten, his honorary grandfather. Truly, this was a man shattered. He hadn't been ready to propose before he left to go to the Caribbean, but he had hoped that Camilla would wait.
During this time, Lord Mountbatten encouraged his young protege to sow his wild oats and have as many affairs as he could before settling down.
Charles looked to Lord Louis Mountbatten as a mentor, as someone that he would turn to for guidance, for advice, someone that was on his side no matter what.
But this all fell apart when Charles's mentor, advisor and great-uncle was assassinated by the Provisional Irish Republican Army due to mounting conflicts following the partition of Ireland. It was a tumultuous time for England, and Charles was personally devastated beyond words, openly weeping during Mountbatten's funeral at the Abbey.
I think there's probably a lot of children that can relate to that. It's quite nice to be able to speak to someone who is a trusted advisor, but also they have a keen love and an understanding of who you are. And I think that's why Charles really gravitated towards Mountbatten.
During this time, Charles leaned heavily on the now married Camilla, and rumours of a renewed love affair began circling. But Charles's grief led him into the arms of another woman, Diana Spencer. One of the most notoriously publicised relationships of the modern world, Charles and Diana's story began in 1977, when Charles was actually dating Diana's older sister Sarah, and he joined her for a weekend of shooting at their family estate. It was there he met Diana, commenting on how fun he thought she was. Soon after, his relationship with Sarah fizzled, and it was at a party with mutual friends where Diana really caught Charles's eye. The eventual princess emphatically talked to Charles about how tragic the death of Lord Mountbatten was and how sorry she felt for Charles and his entire family. Struck by her candour, Charles was deeply affected by Diana's words, and a love affair quickly sprouted from her compassion.
I began to realise, what was going on in my mind and hers in particular, and all these things help. But, it was a gradual business.
I had a long time to think about it, because I knew the pressure was on both of us. And it wasn't a difficult decision in the end. It's what I wanted, it's what I want.
The two became public a few months later when the couple was spotted by a photographer at the royal family's private estate in the Highlands. And from then on, very few details of their love life weren't part of the growing spectacle that was Charles and Diana. After less than a year of dating, Charles proposed to the then 19-year-old Diana, making her one of the most famous women in the world.
Diana couldn't help but absolutely eclipse Charles. She was beautiful, she was, the most photographed woman in the world. I mean, she eclipsed every member of the family at points, even the Queen. And so I think Charles's feeling was that he didn't really stand a chance. And there was a very famous moment in Australia where the crowds were all out waiting for the newlyweds to come and greet them. And there was Charles apologising to the crowds that he was meeting and shaking hands with, because he knew that actually they wanted to shake hands with Diana.
Diana was breaking new ground here as a princess, and I'll say this, and other people will back me up on it, that she was the sort of moderniser of the royal family in the 80s and 90s. And what we see today is very much a byproduct of her activities.
Though she handled much of it with grace, anybody would be shaken with the eyes of the world upon them. When the two wed in 1981, 750 million people tuned in to watch Diana walk down the aisle, making it the most watched royal event in history.
And thereto have given and pledged their troth either to other, and have declared the same by giving and receiving of a ring and by joining of hands. I pronounce that they be man and wife together, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen.
Charles and Diana, now man and wife, move up to the high altar for the blessing.
It was a historic moment for pop culture, with thousands of women flocking to dress shops to get their own version of Diana's iconic gown. But behind the glamour and flash sat heartbreak, and from the very start, Charles's affection for Camilla Parker Bowles, his on-again, off-again love, wore heavily on Diana's heart. She later famously said, "There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded." The two had their first son, William, quickly after marrying, and Harry followed suit only a couple of years later.
William and Harry, she always referred to, certainly to everybody she spoke to, and so many times to me, my boys. They were Prince Charles's boys as well. Let's not forget there are 2 parents in this relationship, and both were extremely good parents.
Diana was a doting mother who was dedicated to making sure they lived some semblance of a normal life, and was just as likely to take them on a royal tour as she was to kick off her shoes and participate in the school's field day.
There's no question Diana, Princess of Wales, was hugely affectionate with her children. She thought nothing of throwing her arms around the boys, whatever the situation. She recognised when it was a formal occasion and when everyone had to be suited and booted and on parade. But at the same time, there were those moments where she just couldn't hold herself back.
William has said often that he appreciated this about his mother, and credits her with making sure he wasn't cut off from reality. Charles, on the other hand, was so consumed with work and his many pursuits that it often seemed like he didn't have time for his sons. It is said that he loved them very much, making an effort to attend their school functions and even leaving them handwritten notes. But by his nature, Charles was remote, and so consumed by his desire to make a difference in the world that many of the people he loved may have felt ignored.
Charles did everything that he could to be more hands-on, to be perhaps more of the parent that he wanted his own parents to be. For example, he would have it as much as possible worked into his official schedule that he could be home for bath time and bedtime so that he could be there to read stories to the children, and he loved being able to do that. It wasn't just Diana who was a hugger. Charles was a hugger too.
The press always cut before it gets to Charles. The press never printed the photos when it was Charles. It was always about Diana. And so I do think that he was unfairly portrayed by the press for a number of years.
Charles's work as heir apparent and the large swaths of time he spent away from Diana deepened a growing divide between the two. And though they initially presented a beautiful picture of family bliss to the world, receiving the adoration of millions, they struggled behind the scenes.
Princess Diana chafed at the royal duties, the ribbon cutting, the handshaking, the grip and grin that went with the job, but she was also very good with it. And she expanded its role. She made it more personable, more likable, less remote than it had been before.
So as the marriage deteriorated and soured, Diana was the victim, Charles was the villain, and that was the narrative that followed him for many, many years. So whether it was being overshadowed by his wife or painted as the villain, it was a very difficult period for him.
Some speculate that the two felt forced into their union by the international popularity or the pressures of the royal family. Others say the marriage was doomed from the start due to Charles's enduring feelings for Camilla, and many also believe that Diana's rocket into stardom caused the young princess a level of stress she could never escape.
Diana was a very prim and proper princess everybody thought did exactly the right thing. And this generated perhaps some friction within the family too that wasn't there in the first place. It's a very ugly thing to see, and I can understand how horrible it must be to live under it.
Charles and Diana spent the next few years distant and unhappy, both leading separate lives. Charles's friends covered up for him as he carried on his thinly veiled affair with Camilla and helped the two see each other, leading Diana to feel more and more ostracized, causing her to fall into the arms of another as well. Though a fashion icon who was internationally loved, a reporter at the time commented that Diana was the love object of everyone in the world except her husband. She was faced in her mid-20s with something she found chilling to contemplate: a fairy tale marriage that had cooled into an arrangement.
The British media is a different kettle of fish. We have 10 national newspapers every single day of the week on the breakfast table at 7 o'clock in the morning, and they're all hungry for news. And if it's raw news, and if it's salacious, and if it's gossipy, they'll publish it.
With Diana's struggles with her mental health, an incendiary tell-all by Andrew Morton detailing the two's private life, and the unrelenting negative attention from the press, Charles and Diana decided to separate in 1992. In an interview with Jonathan Dimbleby centered around a recent documentary on Charles and his career as the Prince of Wales, the only answers the public really wanted were about how the marriage fell apart. Dimbleby asked Prince Charles if he had been faithful to Diana.
Yes, absolutely.
And you were?
Yes. Until it became irretrievably broken down. Us both having tried.
You've been very open about all of this and what you've said. Do you now hope that this issue and expect this issue to go away?
I do think it's quite interesting to note that regardless of everything that transpired between Charles and Diana, he never publicly said a bad word about her, ever. Ever. There is not one moment where he was disrespectful towards her, where he criticised her, where he blasted her for the comments that she made about him. And I think that really sort of speaks to the man he is and how much respect he had for her.
In fairness to both the Prince of Wales and Diana, they kept their disharmony away from the children. And so in that sense, neither William or Harry really understood, the drama, the unhappy drama that existed between their parents, because they themselves dealt with it. We know that it was played out on the international circuit through media, etc.
This scandal threw a light on the royal family that drew the speculations of the world. But underneath it all was two people who just weren't right for each other, and were deeply saddened by the inability to maintain a happy relationship. A year after their divorce became finalized, Diana was killed in the car crash that stopped the world.
It was here just after midnight that a Saturday night out in the City of Lights turned to tragedy. The precise details are still sketchy, but the Mercedes 600 carrying the princess, her Egyptian companion Dodi El Fayed, a driver and a bodyguard emerged from the tunnel a complete crumpled wreck. circumstantial evidence at least that the driver lost control while driving at very high speed. According to some reports, at over 100 miles an hour as he sought to escape from several paparazzi.
It felt as if everyone collectively held their breath, flocking to TV screens as Diana's adoring fans struggled to grasp the truth that she was gone.
London was absolutely silent as the coffin was brought down the street, and occasionally you would hear people sobbing and wailing, "Diana, Diana." So there was an emotion in the Princess of Wales that people responded to.
Many will say they remember exactly where they were when Diana died, a moment of tragedy so impactful that it has been burned into history forever. It was unprecedented, but none felt the sting more so than Charles and his sons.
Charles did the very best that he possibly could in really difficult, trying circumstances. You know, any parent that is left to pick up after another parent has died will say how monumentally challenging that job is. But Charles had to do it on the global stage. He had to do it with everybody having an opinion. He had to do it while having to fulfill the obligations expected of one in his position as well.
It was Charles who broke the news to his sons, striving to be there for them and protect them in the way he hadn't until tragedy brought them together. Pictures of the then 15-year-old William as a pallbearer at his own mother's funeral flooded the tabloids, and the family struggled to mourn while upholding their roles as public figures.
A very extraordinary, yet refined and restrained expression of adoration here in London.
Here is the Prince of Wales, a solo parent, having to do a really difficult job raising two princes on his own. He did the best he could under very, very hard circumstances. But I think he probably wasn't around as much as he perhaps might have wanted to be. There were huge pressures and demands given his role and all of the work and the diary commitments that came with being Prince of Wales.
As he had once before, Charles turned to the now divorced Camilla for comfort, but remained intensely aware of how his renewed relationship with his old flame might affect his sons.
There have been periods since 1997, when Diana, Princess of Wales, died, that Charles's relationship with his sons has wavered. There were many years there where William was angry towards his father, where he struggled with Charles moving on and marrying Camilla, even though I think both William and Harry recognise that Camilla made Charles very happy indeed. Again, any child of divorce will often struggle to see their parent marry somebody else.
He let William and Harry set the pace, keeping his love affair at a distance until the wound left by the loss of their mother Diana became more tolerable. But after years of watching their parents in an unhappy marriage, the boys recognised how enormously happy Camilla made their father, and after many difficult conversations and moments of strife, gave him their blessing. Years after Diana's passing, Charles and Camilla were seen together publicly for the first time, and officially announced their relationship to the world. He was a different man, all smiles and affection, loving Camilla in a way he and Diana had clearly never felt for each other. Though their relationship had been dogged by scandal, drama and heartbreak, it became clear that the two were indeed well suited. And though life had pulled them apart in the past, it had now brought them back together again.
She has shaped him both in the past and today by simply being there, never eclipsing him, never overshadowing him, and being there as a constant and as a companion.
She loves him for the man that he is. It's just that there's an awful lot of baggage that comes with loving him, namely him being the king. But I think really the reason the latter years of his life have been such a success are because of what she brings to the role.
Carefully, after years of ups and downs, they took their relationship slow. And it wasn't until 2005 that the two became engaged. And only 2 months later they were wed in a small civil ceremony, in sharp contrast to the spectacle that had been his wedding day with Diana.
Here he is.
There he is.
His Royal Highness.
Taking his arm.
His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales, and Her Royal Highness, the Duchess of Cornwall. So there they go, back into the Queen's Rolls Royce. Very relaxed looking, weren't they?
Yeah, she's a little bit awkward with her way, but it's quite...
yes.
yes, why not? She's finally got him in a grip, yes.
And I think he recognised that public opinion was to some degree still against he and Camilla and their relationship. It was going to take many, many years for Camilla's image really to be rehabilitated as far as the public were concerned. But I think really what they've shown is how great their love is and how well they complement each other.
Though all their children attended the nuptials, Queen Elizabeth and King Philip were famously absent. But it seems when it came to love, Charles was tired of living in the shadow of what was expected of him, and wasn't going to let the royal family's disapproval of Camilla stand in the way of his happiness.
The idea that Camilla would be marrying into the royal family was unthinkable. Certainly in 1997, after the death of Diana, which was a pivotal moment for the royal family. It was the moment where everything changed for them. And the moment where I think the majority thought that they would never hear of Camilla Parker Bowles again. And yet this was Charles's one true love. And he was determined to bring her back into his life, to rehabilitate her image, her reputation, and to make it possible, both to the palace and to the public, that there could be a relationship there that was accepted by the public and, most importantly, accepted by the Queen.
I think really that very public endorsement from the Queen meant so much to both Charles and Camilla, and really it was a testament to how they have conducted themselves and how well they have served the Queen, the country and the Commonwealth of Nations. And I think really they continue to complement each other in the very best ways.
Because he had previously been made to feel constrained when it came to love, Charles wanted to ensure that his children had the right to choose who they wanted for their life partner. He was determined that William and Harry should be able to follow their hearts, regardless of their position in life or the station of their love interests. But choosing the right woman would prove to not be an easy path for his boys. After all, these were Diana's sons.
And it really is up to both William and Harry to make their marriages work. Because at the end of the day, when all the sort of lust and the passion has worn off, a marriage is a job.
So when William met Catherine, the now Princess of Wales, at St Andrews University, he was both smitten and torn on whether she would be the right fit to be queen, or that she would want to bear the same pressures as his mother. The press pestered William incessantly to make up his mind, continuing to make the situation disturbingly similar to what Charles experienced before he married Diana. William's internal turmoil and then extreme external pressures caused the infamous short-lived breakup between William and Kate, which clearly left them both feeling deeply unhappy. William, distraught, turned to his father to discuss the matter at hand, and Charles gave his son some resounding advice. He told him that if he did not commit to her now, he could lose her forever, and to not make the same mistake he did. And William listened to his father.
It was about 3 weeks ago on a holiday in Kenya. We had a little private time away together with some friends, and I just decided that it was the right time, really. We'd been talking about marriage for a while, so it wasn't a massively big surprise, but I took her up somewhere nice in Kenya and proposed.
It's very romantic. There's a true romantic in that.
There is.
You said yes, obviously.
Of course, yes, yeah.
Thankfully.
Charles is projecting an image not just of him and his crowned queen. This is also about the future of the monarchy. This is about the future of the House of Windsor. And of course, William and Kate, as the Prince and Princess of Wales, are the future.
Even though Kate was a commoner, Charles made sure that she was welcomed into the family and had all the help she needed settling into palace life. From the proper tutorials on royal family etiquette to helping choose music for William and Kate's big day, Charles made sure that this union would be one that is everlasting and based on a strong foundation of familial support. After the wedding, father, son and their two wives have forged a very close relationship.
You're now looking at this sort of core unit of the monarchy. It's the new Fab Four, I suppose. It's Charles and Camilla, it's William and Kate. It's absolutely imperative that they are aligned, that they have the same visions for the monarchy, because the future of the monarchy and the House of Windsor rests on both of their shoulders.
William and Kate are more modern in their approach to being royal and raising children, with William just as determined as his mother Diana was to ensure his children have a semblance of a normal life. But the differences between the two couples does not stand in the way of Charles and Camilla being doting grandparents. Being a grandfather and marrying Camilla has melted Charles's hard exterior, turning him into a warm and generous man who prioritizes family in a way that he didn't in the past.
He's, I think, far more of a family man these days than he ever was, and that's very much down to Camilla. She adores her family. She maintains very, very close links to her son and her daughter. She's a very hands-on grandmother as well. I think she's really opened his eyes to the joys of being a grandparent.
Not only has Charles's newfound sense of fun been enjoyed by his family, but he has shared his good-natured attitude and humour with the British public, unafraid of having a laugh at himself from time to time.
In the west, rain will be lighter and patchier. There will maybe a few drier interludes over Dumfries House in Ayrshire. Aha! There'll be snow for the higher ground of the Highlands and Aberdeenshire. The potential for a few flurries over Balmoral. Who the hell wrote this script? As the afternoon goes on.
This not only endeared him to the world, but set a new precedent for the public personality of a monarch, rattling the previously untouchable nature of the royals, if only just a bit. But Charles's main focus, in the past and today, continues to be his sons, especially as it is now seen that his youngest Harry had found his partner and future wife. The union of Harry and Meghan was supposed to herald in a new look for the royal family, one of unity and inclusion that Charles was firmly behind.
To some degree, everyone was excited to see Diana's youngest son find his happy ending. It was no secret that he wanted to get married, he wanted to have children, he'd been looking for the perfect bride. But Meghan herself was exciting.
The road to their wedding was not an easy one, but the new king showed his support for Meghan by walking her down the aisle to take her place next to Harry, a move that melted many hearts around the world and placed Charles firmly at the side of both of his sons as a supporter of their decisions.
Charles adores Meghan, adores Catherine. We saw at Harry and Meghan's wedding how he took over the fatherly role and walked Meghan the last part of the aisle through the choir of St George's Chapel, how he looked after Meghan's mother, Doria, when they went to sign the register.
Harry was hugely grateful to Charles for stepping in and walking Meghan up the aisle. He makes the point in Spare just how much of a fuss Charles made over Meghan to really make her feel welcome.
I therefore proclaim that they are husband and wife.
However, even though their wedding was one for the record books, the strain of royal life, the expectation to follow certain traditions, and the nasty criticism from the tabloids and public pressure eventually wore down Harry and Meghan. Their break from the royals placed strain on both Queen Elizabeth and Charles, and the world began asking a lot of questions about the internal lives of the royals.
There are no innocent parties in this scenario. Everybody is at fault. Everybody has made mistakes. And I think, again, in order for them to be able to come together and really start to hash this out, everybody is going to have to own their own mistakes and the role that they played in the breakdown of this relationship.
It's a shame because I think had they stayed, they could have done more to improve the institution than they can do from the outside.
At this time, Charles's priority was mending the divides, yet he was left with no clear path to do so. But as it always does, family loss always finds a way to bring people together again.
Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, Earl of Merioneth and Baron Greenwich, Knight of the Most Noble Order of the Garter, Knight of the Most Ancient and Most Noble Order of the Thistle.
In the name of Jesus Christ, who suffered for thee, in the name of the Holy Spirit, who strengtheneth thee, may thy portion this day be in peace, and thy dwelling in the heavenly Jerusalem. Amen.
The death of his father, King Philip, was a very difficult moment for Charles. At times, their relationship was strained, and it could hardly be said that they were close when Charles was growing up. But the loss of a parent can transcend all issues, and is tough for anyone.
In the final years of Philip's life, and certainly during the pandemic years, that really was an opportunity for Charles to get much closer to his father. He would spend a lot of time at Windsor, was the last person before the Queen to see his father before he passed.
Added to this was the immeasurable grief of the Queen upon losing her husband and life partner, causing Charles in some ways to become the leader of the family, as his mother pulled away from public life, and those around him looked to him for support more than ever. In the funny way that grief does, it did bring the family together. Harry flew in for the funeral as Meghan remained behind in the US to take care of their family, and for a brief period of time, it seemed like their brothers could bury the hatchet for the sake of their grandfather's memory. Even though the relationship between Charles and Harry's new family is rather strained, the King has not lost hope that one day they will be able to mend the divide.
I want also to express my love for Harry and Meghan as they continue to build their lives overseas.
The trust has been broken, and the moment the trust is broken, that is incredibly difficult to get back. The idea of Harry being able to patch things up with his father is wonderful. Whether or not that can happen before the coronation remains to be seen, but I think you'd have to be an optimist to think that it would.
After all, Charles has learned from his mistakes and those of his forefathers, and plans to continue making an effort to prioritize family in the face of the ever-increasing demands of the royals' public lives. Just as Prince Philip was laid to rest, one could feel that Prince Charles knew what lay ahead. Even though the Queen's Platinum Jubilee was a sight to see, one could see that she was bravely using all the energy she had to continue the promise she made years ago. In the few months following the Jubilee, Charles was firmly and lovingly by her side, always watching, still learning what it means to be both honourable and steadfast as the monarch, up until the very end.
The Queen has died, very sadly. She died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and Queen Consort were referenced there to Charles. He automatically becomes King, will remain at Balmoral this evening.
We could all only imagine what Charles felt as his mother took her last breath that fateful day in Scotland. He did, after all, lose his mother, and had to share that grief with his family. But he had a different and new responsibility as the now king. A new era was about to begin.
Well, I think the death of the Queen was a huge shock to the British public, and Charles stepped in a most reassuring way. While we've missed the Queen, he has stepped into that role in a way that I think most people feel he's off on the right foot. He's making a success of this. And I think most people have faith in King Charles III.
But before this new stage could commence, the world needed time to mourn the passing of not only a great queen, but a cherished mother and grandmother.
He has allowed people the time they needed to grieve, to get used to the idea that we now have a country in which the Queen is not the head of state. I think he recognised that while he was grieving, Britons were grieving too.
Any division between family members had to now lie dormant while each paid their respects and said farewell. King Charles and Queen Consort Camilla both steered the family with grace and dignity.
Just after the Queen passed away, when he and the Queen Consort arrived back in London, they had the cars stop just short of the gates to Buckingham Palace so that they could get out and meet the mourners, meet the people that had bought flowers, who had come to grieve collectively outside Buckingham Palace.
From the funeral to leading the charge with heartfelt emotion, Charles started to show the kind of king he would be.
Alongside the personal grief that all my family are feeling, we also share with so many of you in the United Kingdom, in all the countries where the Queen was head of state, in the Commonwealth and across the world, a deep sense of gratitude for the more than 70 years in which my mother, as Queen, served the people of so many nations.
With Charles as the new king, his former title of Prince of Wales naturally transferred to William and his wife Catherine. This power duo have truly shown what a strong partnership can produce, especially when it comes to the monarchy and their family.
I think perhaps William having a family of his own, he can understand in hindsight some of the difficulties that his father went through. I think he can understand the pressures of the job.
William also understands the enormity of the role his father is undertaking because he knows that will be his role one day. And I think he understands, because he has Kate by his side, just how much Charles needs Camilla.
In fact, the new Prince and Princess of Wales have taken every precaution to ensure that their children have a lovely upbringing, from baking cookies in the kitchen with their mum to hugging Grandpa, aka the new king, at any given royal event. William and Catherine want their kids to have a normal life while upholding the family values. It is without a doubt that the new Prince and Princess of Wales will take centre stage at the first coronation in several decades. Word on the street is that the King's coronation will be steeped in tradition with a modern flair.
The occasion itself will generate global television audiences.
I think the king is going to be very keen to honour the ancient rituals, the religious elements, the traditional elements that people are expecting from the coronation. But at the same time, he recognises that there are going to have to be some practical changes.
We do know that it will be rather scaled back, certainly compared to the number of people attending the Queen's coronation. We know it's going to be shorter in length, which Charles is very aware that he doesn't want the coronation to be a great drain on the taxpayer purse. Nonetheless, it's going to be an incredible spectacle, the likes of which most of us have never seen in our lifetime.
The guest list will be one that everyone will keep an eye on, with everyone asking, will Harry and Meghan have a part in his big day? Though the king is sure to be rather hurt by everything that has occurred, family is family, and most believe some form of communication will happen between father and son to ease recent events.
Prince Charles, who I'm sure was very hurt by this, because he was the one who had planned this new kind of royal family. Prince Charles can extend a hand after this year and say, what about it? What do you think? We can renegotiate the terms of your being in the royal family.
Whether Harry and Meghan decide to attend, well, that remains to be seen. Certainly an invitation will be extended to them. It'll be up to them as to whether or not they want to be there in person.
On Queen Elizabeth's coronation, the biggest discussion was regarding cameras within the event broadcasting to every corner on the globe. Today, cameras are a requirement for large royal events such as weddings, funerals, and of course the coronation of a new monarch. Millions around the globe are expected to tune in as Charles is officially crowned the new King of England.
It's also an opportunity for Great Britain to dominate the world stage for a positive reason. It's an opportunity for national unity, for national pride, for the Commonwealth realms to come together, for the Commonwealth of Nations to come together. It is going to be a grand and glorious occasion, but one in which the King is very mindful of how much people are struggling and how much they could also use a boost to optimism and a boost of national pride. So I think it promises to be a very special day indeed.
But what impact does Charles plan to leave on the world after many years of tireless preparation and personal introspection on the role of the monarchy in this new age?
Charles is very much a dominant figure today in the monarchy, in the institution. He's very much to the fore in terms of the organisations. So people know who he is.
Charles has often spoken of his desire to balance tradition with progress, and has long been known as a man of many opinions on everything from fast fashion to climate change. He will be a different sort of monarch. Charles is a deep thinker, romantic, sentimentalist, a royal biographer once said. But Charles is also the first to show esteem for his mother's rule, and must have learned much from watching her.
I think Queen Elizabeth II leaves the single greatest blueprint of any previous monarch. Truly, when you look back at her reign, it was remarkable. She walked a very careful line. She was stoic. We, to this day, don't know anything about her political likes and dislikes, her political leanings.
But of course, he also had all those years of tutelage, of mentoring from his mother. That will, I'm sure, stand him in very good stead. Yes, he will do things differently. I think his approach will be different. I think we've already seen evidence of that. But I think he will take the core values of the Elizabethan age and interpret them in his own unique way, but that fundamental principle of service before self will be at the heart of his reign too.
Queen Elizabeth was a staunch believer that the crown should not interfere with politics or social issues, and though she was often questioned about matters of her day, including apartheid, feminism and Brexit, she remained stoic and neutral. She believed that as a ruler one should be a constant, consistent, immovable presence, a pillar of strength for the people in changing time. And by and large she was loved for it, even among her critics. Though it is not a position Charles altogether agrees with, it is one he understands. having stated that he knows he won't have the same time to dedicate to his passions when he is king, and must focus on upholding the austere nature of the position.
Charles publicly spoke in an interview to mark his 70th birthday that he absolutely understood the differences between being Prince of Wales and being king, and the restrictions and constraints that came with being king, and certainly in the early months of his kingship we've seen him very aware of that. He has made certain fundamental decisions so that no one can accuse him of being a meddling king when many accused him of being a meddling Prince of Wales.
I think King Charles III is keen to make his own mark, but at the same time he recognises the gravitas of his position, and he doesn't show any sign of wanting to implement any sort of radical change. If there are any changes, they're going to be slow, and they're probably going to be universally approved.
Though he claims to value the benefits of political neutrality, Charles, by his actions, with something as simple as letting a mourner kiss his cheek when he addressed the crowd upon the death of his mother, has striven to make the royals more accessible to the public, and to chip away at the aloof nature of the monarchy.
Constitutionally, the monarchy as an institution cannot be political, cannot make political statements, cannot be as vocal, where there are rules. They're not written down rules, but constitutionally there are things you can do and you can't do.
As the longest-serving heir apparent in British history, Charles had plenty of time to nurture his passions and form educated opinions.
His huge love of reading really is what sets him aside. He is incredibly well versed in so many different topics. He understands the inner workings of various institutions. He understands how to make a difference, and he cares deeply.
Those close to him and his organisations have found him to be very concerned about social issues, the economy and the environment starting as a young man, and his ample time waiting in the wings has only allowed him to become more deeply involved. Where Queen Elizabeth was quick and efficient with her dealings, Charles is known to linger, asking his subjects about their work and very interested in the details of why they do things a certain way.
I think the king recognises how important it is to get out among the people, to be seen, to be visible, to engage with people from different backgrounds, from different minority groups, different cultures, different races, different religions. He is fascinated by the multicultural society that makes up the United Kingdom.
Among his staff, he is known for being quite concerned by the day-to-day life of his subjects, just as much as the issues facing the world that would affect them for generations to come.
He's helped well over 1 million young people get ahead, whether it's through grants, mentor programs, job training, apprenticeships. A lot of the people that he has helped have said that if it wasn't for the work of the Prince's Trust, they would have ended up in prison. They would have ended up on drugs. They would have ended up down and out. And yet now, not only are they thriving themselves, they've been able to employ other people. They've been able to pay it forwards, and I think that really is a testament to who the king is and how deeply he cares.
As heir apparent, he formed think tanks to discuss organic farming practices, ethical ways to raise healthy livestock, and what he perceives as the dehumanizing nature of modern architecture.
Charles was a modernizer as the Prince of Wales. You know, he never sat still. He was always ahead of the curve. He was talking about GM crops and homeopathy and mindfulness before anyone else had latched onto it. And he was often laughed out of the room for talking about such things.
At the COP26 Climate Summit in Glasgow, he spoke ardently about how he believes the world governments are failing to adequately address climate change, and refused to back down an inch that it would take an all-hands-on-deck approach for any real change to occur, including a radical shift from using fossil fuels to more sustainable, eco-friendly energy sources.
But he was also an incredibly forward-thinking man, and I think it's only now that people are starting to really recognise how ahead of his times he was, how thoughtful he always was. He was labelled dotty by so many people, and he did talk about the fact that he found a lot of the criticism quite difficult to bear, and yet now he is viewed as one of the most preeminent voices on all things green. He's hugely respected.
Nature is our best teacher. In this regard, restoring natural capital, accelerating nature-based solutions, and leveraging the circular bioeconomy will be vital to our efforts.
Though this stance has earned him the esteem of many Western leaders, those closer to home criticise the notion that a future monarch would so resolutely pick a side in such a large issue. A reprimand Charles has heard often. But when it comes to pressing concerns, Charles has let their words roll off his back, accepting their disapproval with the same grace as his mother. Not a man of mere opinion with no action, Charles has devoted 129,600 acres to his ultimate dream of sustainability. He's a patron of over 420 charitable organizations around the globe, and has used his old love of the rural landscape to form the Prince's Countryside Fund, which is dedicated to improving the lives of those without access to urban development.
So if you've got a figurehead, a member of the British royal family, to head up that charity, you're going to win. And that's what he's doing.
If you were to ask his wife Camilla, she would tell you that Charles has spent many late nights reading on the subjects that interest him and writing copious notes to his various organizations on ways they can grow and improve.
I think people also are really impressed with Camilla's commitment to her charitable endeavours. She's done a huge amount of work on behalf of osteoporosis. She's really tried to push back against violence against women. And so she is giving a voice to people that didn't have a voice before.
With a robust resume of activism as Prince, Charles will have to turn to more modest changes as king, focusing on issues closer to home. We know that he plans to slim down the monarchy to make it more efficient, and is not afraid of doing any and all work associated with the title. He is also discussing making the royal residences of Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, and Balmoral into public spaces and museums, believing the historic sites to belong to the nation, not solely the royal family, and his intent on pushing the people to reconnect with these institutions. He has claimed that the palace is not a suitable residence for the modern age, and plans on living in a more modest space. But he has also expressed his disagreement with the burdens of the taxpayers to fund the royals' living expenses, echoing a long-held resentment by the public.
I think the king is very keen to make the monarchy more accessible, certainly more transparent. That is very important to him. I think he recognises in this day and age in particular, deference is dead. That doesn't exist anymore. People want to know what they're getting for their money. They want to make sure they're getting value for money. But I think one of his biggest challenges is going to be maintaining the monarchy's relevance in an increasingly fickle world.
The British people have been very critical of the Crown's spending in the past, and Charles sees his rule as an opportunity to make the royal family more self-sufficient. A man long dedicated to the people of which he rules, it appears that Charles's desire to serve the British people will only evolve as he takes on his new station.
Well, I think it's the sheer range of Charles's passions and pursuits that have made him the Prince of Wales that he was and the king that he is today. His interests reach far and wide. He's an incredibly well-read man with a broad spectrum of interests, and I think that has been hugely important in shaping the man that he is, and of course the king he is today.
A very different public life as heir apparent, coupled with living in his mother's shadow for many years, creates a unique challenge for Charles to leave his mark as the new ruler. The British public is divided on their opinions of Charles, many believing that William should have assumed the throne, and still others unable to wrap their heads around a monarch that isn't Queen Elizabeth.
He has to consider and look at the popularity of his two sons, because it's that popularity that will maintain this global interest in what is an extraordinary subject.
But Charles was never in a rush to become king, and instead believed that in his many years as heir apparent were a blessing, uniquely situating him to leave behind a legacy of activism as he now adopts a more formal, neutral role as king. Will he further shake the foundation of the monarchy, finding small pockets to push progress, or will he leave it to the appointed members of government to enact change?
The landscape looks different in every single way, the demographic landscape, the political landscape, the royal landscape. Charles is very aware that he has to make this connection with the people. He comes to the throne in an age where the royal family need to justify its existence, prove that they are a vital and necessary part of the British Constitution and of the British way of life.
So the next sovereign will be Charles. After Charles will be William, and after William will be George, and George will take us through to the 22nd century. So the monarchy, the likelihood of the monarchy surviving is pretty good. We don't know any other. It works for us. It seems to work on a number of European countries. It is healthy, it is in good shape, it is popular. So all things being equal, we will continue with the monarchy.
As we move forward through the years, no one can predict the future, but the new king will definitely have the massive task of paving the road for his new and modern monarchy in taking its place in the world. For a man that has faced his fair share of challenges both privately and in the public eye regarding his family and reign, one thing is for certain: no one will doubt that King Charles III has the fortitude to ensure that his royal family will survive and endure any challenge they may face.
King Charles is going to want to continue the good work that his mother carried out, while also putting his own stamp on the institution. And I think his reign promises to be very, very exciting, and I can't wait to see what it has in store.